They say heartbreak doesn't kill. But whoever said that never met Warren Langley. At 68 years old, Warren had survived the kind of loss that dulls the world around you. The love of his life, his wife Helen, had died 3 years earlier, and since then, every day felt like a hollow echo of the one before it. He kept the lights on, fed his cat, and made small talk with the neighbors, but the truth? He was drifting. Not lost, exactly, just waiting. Until someone reached out. Or so he thought. It started innocently enough, a username in a chat room for widowed seniors. Cleo Hart. She was kind. Warm. Said she understood his pain. Over time, their nightly chats became his oxygen. Her name was Lena, she said. She shared stories about her bakery job, her failed marriage, her dreams. She sent photos, carefully edited and just blurry enough to hide the truth. And Warren? He didn't ask questions. He wanted to believe. But hope is a currency. And over 3 months, Warren spent $57,000 of it. Every wire transfer came with a promise. Every prepaid card with a reason. Fixing her car. Hospital bills. A dream she said they'd share one day. He never told his family. Why would he? This was his second chance, his shot at love after a lifetime of loss. And just when he thought they were finally going to meet, she disappeared. Vanished. No goodbye. No explanation. Only silence. What followed wasn't just heartbreak. It was a truth so brutal, so deeply personal, it sent Warren collapsing onto the floor of his home, his heart unable to bear the weight of what was discovered next. The woman he loved online was his own granddaughter. For most of his life, Warren Langley believed in structure: morning coffee at 6:30 sharp, freshly ironed shirts on Mondays, and dinner with his wife at precisely 5:45 every evening. After retiring from a long career as a school principal, his world had quietly narrowed. The halls that once echoed with the laughter and chaos of children were replaced by the slow creak of his front porch swing and the distant bark of neighborhood dogs. He took pride in his routines. They gave him meaning. But routines, no matter how comforting, can't hold back grief. 3 years before the incident, Warren lost his wife, Helen, to a sudden and brutal stroke. One moment they were discussing what kind of tulips to plant in the spring, and the next, she was gone. The emergency room doctor had been kind but clinical. The finality in his voice left Warren hollow. 44 years of marriage ended in under 4 minutes. There was no warning. No final words. Just silence. The months after her passing were slow and heavy. Warren kept the house exactly as she left it, the magazine still fanned out on the coffee table, her teacup resting on the kitchen counter. He'd sit in her favorite chair at night, just to feel close to her. Friends dropped by at first, offering casseroles and condolences. But eventually, even grief loses its novelty for others. The visits grew less frequent, the phone rang less often. His daughter Megan, a practical and overworked single mother of 2, tried to visit every Sunday. She would bring her youngest, Noah, who loved to read and would sit cross-legged on the floor flipping through old comic books Warren had saved. Chloe, the oldest, rarely came. She and Warren had always had a distant relationship. Not hostile, but strained. When she was younger, she often challenged his rules, skipped family dinners, and bristled at authority, traits that only widened the gap between them. By the time she was 18, she dropped out of community college and bounced between part-time jobs with little direction. Megan worried about her father, but Warren, ever the stoic, insisted he was fine. He adopted a ginger tabby from the shelter and named her Pumpkin. He started attending a local book club. He even tried his hand at gardening, though his roses never quite bloomed the way Helen's had. Still, there were signs the loneliness was taking its toll. He began forgetting things, doctor's appointments, phone calls. He lost weight. Once, Megan found a month's worth of unpaid bills stacked on his kitchen counter, unopened. So, in an effort to help him reconnect with the world, Megan bought him a smartphone for his 68th birthday. He was reluctant at first. "I don't need all this nonsense," he'd said. But slowly, he began using it. At first, just for reading the news and playing Sudoku. Then, he discovered online message boards, places where widows and widowers shared their grief, traded gardening tips, and told stories about their lives. If you're gripped by stories like this, where truth hides in shadows and every detail matters, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. It helps more than you know, and ensures you never miss the next twist. That's where he first saw a username that stood out, Cleo Hart. She commented on a post he'd made about losing Helen. "Your story broke my heart," she wrote. "I lost my husband 3 years ago. The quiet is the worst part, isn't it?" Something about her words felt authentic. Human. They began exchanging private messages. She told him her name was Lena Carter, that she lived in upstate New York, and that she was a former bakery owner recovering from a recent surgery. Her tone was warm, thoughtful, she never pried, but always knew just what to say. Their conversation started light, recipes, memories, books they liked. Then it shifted. She asked about Helen, what she was like, what Warren missed most. Warren, guarded in person, found himself opening up in a way he hadn't in years. She called him gentle, brilliant, and brave. Words he hadn't heard in a long time. Eventually, the conversations took on a more romantic tone. Lena said he made her feel seen. She began sharing filtered photos, nothing explicit, just enough to suggest intimacy, a selfie in a soft cardigan, a blurry shot of her sipping tea. Warren never questioned the vague angles or the heavy filters. He wasn't tech-savvy enough to know better. He was just flattered someone like her was paying attention to someone like him. At night, he'd wait for her messages like a teenager. They spoke daily, sometimes into the early morning. Warren hadn't felt this alive in years. He didn't tell Megan about Lena, not out of secrecy, but out of a quiet hope he couldn't quite put into words. What if this was his second chance? Lena told him she was trying to start a small business, handmade scarves sold online. But things were hard. She had unpaid hospital bills. Her car was in the shop. Warren offered to help, gently at first. She resisted. Said she was too proud. But the next week, she finally agreed, just $500 to help with a car part. He wired it without hesitation. That first transfer opened the door. Over the next 4 months, Lena's requests grew. Each time she sounded distressed, embarrassed to ask, but always appreciative. She told him she'd pay him back. "This isn't about money," she said once. "It's about someone finally believing in me." Warren clung to those words. What he didn't know was that while he was pouring his heart out across a digital void, the person on the other end wasn't a woman recovering from heartbreak in New York, but his own 22-year-old granddaughter, sitting in the upstairs bedroom of her mother's house just 8 miles away. Chloe Simmons was never particularly close to her grandfather. As a child, she resented his rules. As a teenager, she mocked his formality. She had always been more interested in bending boundaries than observing them. Her teachers called her sharp, but distracted. Her mother described her as complex, often walking on eggshells just to avoid a fight. Chloe had bounced through short-lived jobs, hostess, delivery driver, cashier, rarely lasting more than a few weeks. She had a knack for telling people what they wanted to hear, and an even sharper talent for leveraging sympathy into opportunity. No one, not even Megan, knew the full extent of Chloe's online presence. Multiple fake profiles. Pseudonyms. Chat accounts. She spent hours studying how people communicated, especially older users, watching YouTube channels for voice tone, sentence structure, emotional triggers. What began as a joke, pretending to be someone else in a chat room, quickly became an experiment in influence. Chloe never expected Warren to respond to Cleo Hart. But when he did, she recognized the opportunity instantly. The messages that followed weren't random. They were curated. Crafted. Each reply fine-tuned to his loneliness, his grief, his need to feel valued again. At first, she told herself it was harmless. He was just a name in a chat. But when he sent that first $500, something shifted. She began investing more time, using phone apps to generate filtered photos, writing messages at night, rehearsing each response for maximum impact. The money came in steadily after that. Small amounts at first, then larger. Warren, desperate to believe, convinced himself it was love. Chloe, calculating and cold, convinced herself it was survival. "He doesn't need it," she whispered once into her phone, laughing with a friend. "I'm doing him a favor. He's happy." No one noticed. Megan was too busy juggling work and bills. Noah stayed in his room playing games. Warren kept his secret romance buried under layers of shame and nostalgia. By the time the final transfer was made, nearly $57,000 total, Warren had stopped questioning any of it. But in the background, the weight of it all was closing in. Chloe had made a mistake. A small one, but enough. An IP address pinged too close. A selfie filter reused across profiles. The illusion, so carefully maintained, was starting to crack. And Warren, oblivious to the truth, was preparing to ask Lena to visit him. He'd cleaned the guest room. Bought her favorite tea. Even picked out a book he thought she might enjoy. He had no idea the woman he was falling in love with was someone he'd once taught to ride a bicycle in the park near their old home. The ground beneath him had already started to give way. August 17th began like any other Thursday for Warren Langley. A warm mug of coffee cradled between his palms, the comforting buzz of the morning news in the background, and the steady hum of Pumpkin, his faithful old cat, trailing him from room to room. To Warren, it was another quiet day in a quiet life. He had no reason to believe that, within hours, his entire world would collapse. It started with a message. A brief, panicked line of text from Lena, the woman Warren had grown to love through glowing screens and tender words. She told him she was being evicted. That she needed $10,000. That she had no one else to turn to. But this time, something was different. There was a crack in the performance, barely noticeable, yet unsettling. The message was more desperate, more rushed. Sloppier. The tone wasn't like Lena. Not the Lena Warren had come to adore. Not the woman who sent photos of croissants she'd baked that morning, or voice messages filled with sweet nothings and gentle reassurances. No, this sounded like someone else entirely. He asked her for a voice note. Just a simple, "I love you," to soothe his growing unease. There was no reply. Hours passed. Silence. And then, another text. A cold dismissal. A plea to just trust her. But Warren could no longer do that. His instincts, long dormant and dulled by loneliness, finally stirred awake. He opened her profile, the one he'd bookmarked months ago. And just like that, it was gone. Deleted. Disappeared. Erased. The woman who'd said she wanted to grow old with him no longer existed. He tried calling. Disconnected. He tried emailing. Undeliverable. Every avenue he had relied on to feel connected to this person vanished like smoke. And when he looked through his online banking history, what he found made his breath catch in his throat. 37 separate transfers. Some small, others alarmingly large. A total loss of over $57,000. His retirement. His nest egg. Everything he'd put away since Diane's death. Gone. That night, Warren sat in the dark of his den, staring into the void, grief-stricken not just over the betrayal, but over the idea that the connection he believed in had never existed at all. The next day, his daughter Megan arrived unexpectedly. She found her father sunken into an armchair, gaunt and pale, a stack of printed papers and receipts spread before him like an autopsy report of his heart. He said little. His shame outweighed even his heartbreak. But the evidence spoke volumes. And it was Megan who made the call. Within hours, a detective from the Whitefield County Sheriff's Office arrived at the Langley home. Detective Alyssa Harden was no stranger to digital deception. She'd seen romance scams before, but none quite like this. None that felt so personal. So calculated. So close to home. She listened as Warren described Lena. Her bakery. Her laugh. Her tenderness. All the things that made her feel real. But to a trained eye, certain patterns stood out. No video calls. No live photos. Only prepaid card transfers. Always an excuse for why she couldn't meet. Always just enough detail to keep him emotionally tethered, but never enough to verify her existence. Harden began digging. She issued subpoenas for the digital wallets and mobile payment services where Warren's money had gone. Each one pointed to different account names, usernames, aliases, scattered across the internet like breadcrumbs meant to mislead. But there was one promising angle, the photographs. Detective Harden sent the images to the forensic lab. There, an analyst named Leo Park found what Warren never could. Most of the photos had been digitally scrubbed, stripped of metadata, or worse, pulled directly from online databases. But one image held something unusual. A reflection. In the background, barely visible in a glass frame, was the distorted figure of a teenage girl holding the phone. The composition was sloppy. The angle unintentional. But it was enough. Leo enhanced the image. Behind the girl was a school lanyard draped over a chair. The words, at first illegible, slowly emerged under the software's correction. Detective Harden returned to the Langley home, and when she asked Warren if he had any family connected to that school, he froze. There was only one name that fit. Chloe. His granddaughter. The realization didn't come as a sharp jolt, but as a slow, suffocating descent into horror. Memories of conversations. Small inconsistencies. Her presence around the house during certain times. The way she'd once asked him about dating apps, or her curiosity about his online friend. He had missed the signs. Or maybe, he had refused to see them. Detective Harden visited Chloe's home the next morning under the guise of a welfare check. Chloe greeted her like any other curious teen might, with a practiced charm and just enough indifference. But Harden noticed the cat, Pumpkin, warming instantly to the girl's feet, as if they were familiar. She noticed how Chloe flinched ever so slightly when she mentioned the name Lena. And most of all, she noticed how quickly the teenager claimed her phone was broken when asked to show it. That was enough for Harden to request a warrant. What they uncovered next blew the case wide open. Inside Chloe's bedroom, the search team found the digital equivalent of a crime scene, login credentials to multiple burner accounts, prepaid card receipts, and, most damning of all, a flash drive labeled Carter script. On it were message templates. Romantic declarations. Faux tragedies. Financial emergencies. Each message crafted like a stage play, each sentence polished to perfection. They weren't just love letters. They were weapons. The words Warren had once treasured, had once believed were meant for him, were mass-produced, cut and pasted from a playbook of manipulation. And behind every keystroke, was his own granddaughter. When Chloe was brought in for questioning, she cracked within hours. Not with tears or guilt, but with a hollow, mechanical resignation. As if she had already prepared for this. As if the mask had grown too heavy to wear any longer. She admitted to creating the persona. To sending the messages. to studying her grandfather's grief and twisting it into something profitable. What began as an experiment, she explained, quickly turned into a lifeline. Attention turned to opportunity. Opportunity turned into power. And power, into routine. In her mind, she wasn't hurting him. She was just filling a void. And making him feel wanted was simply part of the transaction. The authorities charged Chloe Simmons with fraud, identity theft, and elder financial exploitation. She was only 17, but the weight of her crime shattered whatever innocence remained. When the news broke, it spread like wildfire. Granddaughter poses as online lover, steals retired man's life savings, one headline read. Another, family betrayal at its cruelest. Talk shows dissected the case. Social media flared with outrage, confusion, even perverse fascination. Everyone had an opinion, but no one truly understood. They didn't see Warren sitting in the dark, staring at the blinking cursor of a chat window that would never respond again. They didn't see Megan pacing her hallway at 2 a.m., wondering how she'd failed to see the storm building under her own roof. They didn't see Chloe, alone in a holding cell, her face blank, her expression unreadable, not sad, not afraid, just vacant. Detective Harden closed the file with a heavy heart. Not because the case was over, but because it never really would be. Because in the end, this wasn't just a story of fraud. It was a story of hunger, for attention, for love, for something real in an increasingly hollow world. And somewhere between the messages and the lies, a man had fallen in love with a ghost, while the real monster slept in the room down the hall. The morning of Chloe Simmons' arrest arrived with an eerie stillness. August humidity clung to the air, thick and unmoving. At exactly 6:42 a.m., two unmarked vehicles rolled into the quiet cul-de-sac where the Simmons family lived. The neighbors would later say they assumed it was a wellness check, or perhaps an early delivery. But the officers who stepped out wore no expressions of routine. Their faces were etched with gravity. Inside the house, Chloe was asleep, curled in bed beneath a cotton throw, her phone resting under her pillow like a sacred totem. She didn't resist when they entered. In fact, she barely moved. She was groggy, dazed, almost bored by the entire ordeal. As though this was just another part of the performance she had long ago rehearsed in her mind. She was handcuffed in her Winnie the Pooh pajama pants. Charged with aggravated financial exploitation of the elderly, wire fraud, grand larceny, and intentional identity deception, Chloe was processed as a juvenile, but whispers began almost immediately. Rumors that the DA's office was preparing to petition for her to be tried as an adult. Given the magnitude of the emotional and financial damage she'd caused, there were few who argued otherwise. Warren Langley, meanwhile, watched it all unfold from the second floor of a small motel on the edge of town. He couldn't bring himself to return home. Every room reminded him of her. Not the girl in cuffs, but the woman in the messages. Lena. His Lena. But Lena had never existed. The first court appearance was surreal. The courtroom buzzed with an unnatural quiet, the kind that clings to tragedies too complex to categorize. Chloe stood before the judge, her hands folded loosely in front of her. No tears. No visible remorse. She avoided her mother's eyes. She refused to look at Warren. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Camille Price, delivered a sharp, deliberate case summary. Chloe Simmons, they asserted, had engaged in a sustained, calculated digital con against her own grandfather. Over 9 months, she assumed a false identity, constructed a fake romantic relationship, and systematically drained over $57,000 from a man still grieving the loss of his wife. This was not a crime of passion. This was predatory. But the defense, headed by court-appointed attorney Daniel Wilkes, painted a different picture. Chloe was a teenager, barely 17. Raised in a fractured home by a distracted mother and an absent father. She had no history of violence. No priors. What she lacked in maturity, she made up for in quiet desperation. Wilkes argued that this was a case of emotional detachment gone horribly wrong. Chloe hadn't committed armed robbery. She hadn't trafficked drugs. She had slipped into a fantasy world of her own making, one where she had control, where she could feel loved and needed and powerful. It was a coping mechanism gone toxic. But few outside the courtroom had sympathy. The media pounced. By week's end, Chloe's face, blurred in early reports, now fully revealed due to the nature of her charges, was plastered across screens and headlines. Granddaughter catfishes retired vet. Love scam within the family. Wolf in family's clothing. Every detail of the case was dissected. News outlets aired comparisons to high-profile fraud cases. Internet sleuths poured through Chloe's online presence. They unearthed old social posts, cryptic poems about loneliness, venting threads about boomer manipulation, ironic memes about catfishing. What may have once been harmless teenage angst now looked sinister in context. Public opinion split into three camps. Some demanded she be tried as an adult. They saw her actions as irredeemable, a sociopath in training. Others believed she was a product of digital desensitization, a teenager who blurred the line between fantasy and reality in a world that increasingly rewarded detachment. And a small, very vocal minority admired her. Called her clever. Even brave. A modern Robin Hood in pink scrunchies and lip gloss, taking from the lonely to give to herself. It was this last group that disturbed Detective Harden the most. But the case wasn't as clean as it seemed. 2 weeks into the pre-trial discovery phase, a new wrinkle emerged. Bank records showed a secondary account that had received transfers from Chloe's alias. It was registered under the name Miles Jensen, a 19-year-old community college student who had once tutored Chloe in English. When police questioned him, his story collapsed almost immediately. He confessed to helping Chloe manage the fake accounts. He claimed it was just for fun at first, something to laugh about in group chats. But when the money started rolling in, he'd created dummy accounts to help launder the transfers. What began as a teenage prank had evolved into a full-blown digital fraud ring, one that spanned across multiple online identities, servers, and prepaid platforms. Miles had coached Chloe on how to mask IP addresses. He'd even bought a burner phone in his own name, now traced to several messages sent to Warren under the guise of Lena. This revelation shifted the court's perception dramatically. Was Chloe truly the mastermind, or merely the face of something deeper? The prosecution amended the charges, naming Miles as a co-conspirator. But the damage to Chloe's defense was already done. Her lawyer's lone misguided teen narrative had crumbled. The case had become about intent. Structure. Premeditation. In an unexpected turn, the judge agreed to try Chloe as an adult. The Simmons family collapsed under the weight of it all. Chloe's mother took a leave of absence from work. Warren refused to speak to the press. Megan cut off contact entirely. And Chloe herself was moved to a juvenile detention wing pending trial, still isolated, still unreadable. When court proceedings began in earnest that October, the courtroom transformed into a battleground of narrative. Prosecutor Price presented Warren's testimony first. His voice, though trembling, remained composed. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He simply described how love had become a weapon, wielded by the one person he should have been able to trust without hesitation. His story left the room hollow and silent. Then came the digital evidence, charts, timestamps, psychological evaluations. The jury sat through hour after hour of manipulation laid bare, like an emotional crime scene dusted with cold facts. The defense countered with a psychological evaluation suggesting dissociative identity symptoms rooted in long-term childhood neglect. Chloe, they claimed, had become so detached from herself that she lost empathy. Her therapist explained that she didn't understand the magnitude of her choices, because in her mind, Lena was real. Not to Warren. to her. And maybe, that was the real tragedy. Still, no testimony proved more divisive than Chloe's own. On the stand, she didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't even justify herself. She simply told the truth. "I liked being someone else," she said. "I liked being wanted." The courtroom held its breath. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just told the truth. And in that truth lay the horror, that a teenager had become so emotionally adrift, she saw deceit as a language of survival. The verdict arrived after 3 days of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Chloe Simmons was sentenced to 6 years in a juvenile facility, with the possibility of transfer to adult prison at age 18 depending on behavior and ongoing psychiatric evaluations. Miles Jensen received 3 years in a state-run rehabilitation program for young offenders. But in many ways, there were no victors. Warren never regained the money. Or his trust. Or the part of himself that had dared to hope. Chloe, though legally sentenced, had already been imprisoned by her own numbness long before the cuffs closed around her wrists. And the rest of the world? They moved on to the next scandal, the next crime, the next story. But in that quiet cul-de-sac, in that empty house with the creaking stairs and the silent den, the ghost of Lena lingered. Not as a person. But as a question. How well do we really know the people who say they love us? By the time the trial officially began, the courtroom had already transformed into a theater of tension. Photographers waited outside each morning, lenses poised like rifles. Sketch artists sat shoulder to shoulder in the gallery, trying to capture the face of a girl who had become a national question mark. Was she a cold-blooded manipulator or a broken child caught in a fantasy too powerful to stop? Inside the courtroom, the air was always heavy. Every seat was filled. Every breath seemed to come slower. And on the bench at the front, presiding Judge Harriet Lott, a woman known for her sharp rulings and colder silences, watched the trial unfold with granite stillness. The prosecution opened with a tone of absolute certainty. Assistant District Attorney Camille Price didn't mince words. She began not with documents or photos, but with a line no one would forget: "This is not a case about money. It is a case about betrayal so profound, it fractured the soul of a family." From there, she laid out the spine of their argument. Chloe Simmons had committed her crime methodically, repeatedly, and with intent. She had created Lena, a fictional, beautiful, emotionally receptive woman, knowing Warren Langley, her grandfather, was still mourning the death of his wife. She had exploited his loneliness. Then, she monetized his grief. The evidence was overwhelming. Digital forensics experts took the stand, showing how Chloe used VPNs to mask her IP address. How she used voice-changing software in a few audio messages. How she created an intricate web of profiles linked to burner phones and prepaid cards. A cybercrime specialist referred to her setup as sophisticated enough to delay detection for over a year. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as Warren's emails were read aloud. Lines of heartbreak and vulnerability written to a person who never existed. In one, he wrote, "I didn't know I could feel this way again. Not at my age. Thank you for reminding me I'm still alive." The weight of those words lingered in the room like smoke. Then came the video evidence. A surveillance recording from a local gas station showed Chloe topping off her prepaid Visa cards, just hours after texting Warren that she was being evicted and had nowhere to go. In another clip, she laughed in the background of a video posted by her friend, waving a bundle of $100 bills in front of the camera. The caption read, "Gettin' paid today, baby." The prosecution rested with brutal precision. Then came the defense, Daniel Wilkes, who faced the impossible task of making Chloe human again. He opened with a soft, almost mournful tone. "She is not a monster. She is a teenager. And she is lost. What she did was wrong. But we must ask, How does a child become so numb, so disconnected, that they believe love is just a tool for survival? Wilkes brought Chloe's former therapist to the stand, a woman named Dr. Elise Mora, who detailed the emotional detachment and abandonment Chloe had exhibited in sessions long before the crime. Her testimony explained Chloe's near-pathological need for control in emotional relationships. Her inability to connect with people her own age. Her tendency to dissociate when life became too real. The defense argued that Lena wasn't born from malice. She was born from emptiness. One particularly harrowing moment came when Dr. Mora explained Chloe's emotional mirroring, how she had learned to mimic love, not feel it. The jury watched as Chloe sat motionless, hands in her lap, expressionless. Her face had become a cipher, difficult to read, harder to trust. But the defense wasn't finished. They called Chloe's mother, Lydia Simmons, to testify. Visibly shaken, Lydia admitted she had been largely absent during Chloe's formative years. She spoke about working 2 jobs, about missed birthdays and unspoken fears. She admitted Chloe had been a quiet, strange girl, and that she had once found a notebook filled with imaginary conversations written between Chloe and a character she named Lena. It was the first mention of Lena going back years before the scam. The courtroom held its breath. Was this a character Chloe had always dreamed of becoming? Or one she built to survive? Still, the prosecution wouldn't relent. They reminded the jury of the sheer scale of the manipulation. Of the nearly $60,000 lost. Of Warren Langley's devastation. Of the laughter. The boldness. The arrogance. Then came the most dramatic moment of the trial. Warren Langley was called back to the stand, not to recount facts, but to respond to a question posed by the judge herself. If she is convicted, what do you want her sentence to reflect? Warren paused. His hands trembled. I want it to reflect the part of me that won't heal, he said softly. And I want her to understand that love isn't something you play with. Especially not your family's. Those words would become the headline quote of the trial. By the end of closing arguments, the courtroom was drained. 12 jurors retired to deliberate. 72 hours passed. And then the verdict came. Guilty. On all counts, wire fraud, exploitation, criminal impersonation, and conspiracy. The courtroom was silent. No cries. No gasps. Just stillness. Chloe's face didn't change. Not even a blink. Sentencing came 1 week later. 6 years in a juvenile correctional facility, with periodic psychiatric evaluation. The judge ruled that she may be eligible for supervised release after 4 years based on psychological progress and behavior. If deemed unfit, she would be transferred to an adult prison for the remainder of her sentence. Miles Jensen received 3 years in a monitored rehabilitation program and mandatory community service with elder abuse prevention programs. Public reaction was swift. Some thought the sentence too light. Others thought Chloe had been failed long before this case ever began. Media outlets aired opinion pieces debating everything from online safety to digital emotional abuse. But the families, they broke quietly. Warren moved away from the town. He sold his house. Disconnected his phone. His final statement to the court was never read aloud, only delivered privately to the judge in a sealed envelope. Some say it contained a plea for mercy. Others believe it was his way of saying goodbye, once and for all. As for Chloe, she never appealed. Never gave interviews. Never looked back. Inside the juvenile facility, she kept to herself, quiet, withdrawn, almost spectral. And yet, she was not forgotten. Because Chloe Simmons had left behind something more chilling than crime. She left behind a question. What happens when the person who knows your soul best, uses it against you? If you're gripped by stories like this, where truth hides in shadows and every detail matters, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. It helps more than you know, and ensures you never miss the next twist. Thank you for watching.